Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Data Playbook. Here we're going through the Week 10 Sunday games, so let's get into the next preview. Our next game is the Saints going to Carolina, where Carolina is favored on the money line with a spread of 5.5 and a total line of 38.5. And I'll switch over to the averages so you can see how those match up with the rankings, where we have New Orleans as the worst in the league at scoring for themselves and pretty bad at preventing their opponent from scoring. Their offensive is below average, maybe bottom third, with a passing rank of 22 and a rushing rank of 27. They're a little better with their tight ends at a rank of 17. And defensively, they're, again, that bottom third or so, a little better with the tight ends. And defensively, they're about the same with the bottom third, except for the allowed passing rank of 14, about average there, but everything else pretty bad. For Carolina, you also have a pretty bad scoring rank and a pretty bad, almost the worst passing rank. They do have a really good rushing rank at 5, and their tight end rank matches their passing rank pretty much with a rank of 28. Defensively, they're a little bit closer to average, although they do allow quite a few to tight ends compared to how much their passing rank is, and otherwise it's about average. Looking at the quarterbacks, you have Tyler Schroe, I think, and Bryce Young, with Tyler averaging less than 5 points per game this season, and Bryce Young averaging 11.9 fantasy points per game this season. Tyler's had 2 passing interceptions, while Bryce Young has had 6, and 2 fumbles lost due to sacks, and then 1 other fumble. And here's their season averages. Obviously, New Orleans having their trouble with quarterbacks, trying to pick the right one here now. So now that Tyler's in, he doesn't even make the rushing carry share. And then over here with Bryce Young, he doesn't rush too much for his team, so he only has about 7.8% of the team's total carry share. And then with the running backs in this game, you have Alvin Kamara and Rico Dowdle. Alvin Kamara has averaged 9.2 fantasy points per game this season, and Rico has averaged 14.6 fantasy points per game this season. The only turnovers come from the Saints side, with Alvin Kamara having a rushing fumble and a receiving fumble, but Rico having none. And then here's your averages, along with our usual weekly breakdown. And then the rushing carry share, where we see Alvin Kamara gets 53.3% of the team's total carry share. We can see that another large chunk of that's taken up by Condre Miller and even Spencer Rattler, who isn't in the game anymore at this point. And then over here with Carolina, you have Rico Dowdle with 51.5% of the team's total carry share. Again, a lot of that's taken up by his committee partner, with Chuba Hubbard here at 33%. And then looking into our number 1 receivers with Chris Olave, and I think it's Tetero and McMillan. Chris Olave having 14.1 average fantasy points per game this season, and Teterota averaging 12.1. There's only 1 interception from Chris Olave during a trick play, but no other turnovers. So then we'll look at their averages and their receiving yard share, with Chris Olave getting 29.3% of the team's total receiving share, which is the largest on the team. And with McMillan over here getting 33.2% of the team's total receiving share, which is also the largest by far since it's much more spread out with Carolina. Your number 2 receivers are Brandon Cooks and Tommy Tremble. Cooks averages 3.9 fantasy points per game this season, while Tommy Tremble averages 4.1. Your number 2 receivers in this game are Brandon Cooks and Xavier Legette. Cooks averages just under 4 fantasy points per game this season, while Xavier averages 7.2. Between the two of them, there are no turnovers that they've given up. So then we'll look at their averages and their receiving breakdown, where we see Brandon Cooks gets the smaller part that disappears once it's popped out. It looks to be somewhere about this, so maybe about 8% of the team's total receiving share, which is pretty small compared to these other ones. That probably does make sense since I think this 26% is Rashid Shaheed, and then this other one we'll see with tight ends, but I think that's Juwan Johnson. Over here with Xavier, he gets about 10.7% of the team's total receiving share, which is also pretty small, but since there's so many other people receiving, that is the second largest amount of receiving on the team. That takes us to tight ends with Juwan Johnson and Tommy Tremble. Johnson averages 9.9 fantasy points per game this season, and Tremble averages 4.1. The only turnover coming from Juwan Johnson with a receiving fumble. So now we'll flip over the averages and take a look at their breakdowns. Juwan Johnson gets a receiving share of 20.9% of the team's total receiving yards. I think that's interesting to note that is third largest on the team. And then over here with Carolina, you have Tommy Tremble getting about 7.7% of the team's total receiving share. So it's a tough one to say how this will go. I think that, if Carolina really depends on their rushing as they have, they could run all over the Saints, probably get a lot of scoring from that. Although both of them are pretty bad at scoring for themselves, so that I do believe this could be a very low-scoring game. I do also want to think that New Orleans could really utilize their tight ends here with the best ranking that they have offensively, since Juwan Johnson is the third largest receiver right now on the team. And you have Rashid Shaheed out, who's their second largest receiver on the team. So they might end up utilizing Johnson a lot more, especially against a team that's much worse against stopping the tight end. So that's all I have for this game today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like and subscribe, and leave a comment on what else you might want to see in the future. Other than that, thank you so much for watching.